All right. We have some folks that are on the way, and they'll get here when they get here. And meanwhile, we are the people who are responsible and punctual and excited and diligent and all of that, okay? So what that means is page 243, and this should be loud enough. Why don't you just go back and then go forward again, because go all the way to the beginning. Now go forward. Okay, that's too soft. Turn that up. We're going to get this figured out. Now go back. Get it twice. There, good. Now go forward. Okay, that's better. Probably loud enough. Okay? Because once we start singing, we can't hear it, then that's not good. Okay, so let's rise.
So that's your volume if you need to turn it up.
Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the light no darkness can overcome. Stay with us, Lord, for it is evening, and the day is almost over. Let your light scatter the darkness and illumine your church. Joyous light of glory of the immortal Father, heavenly, holy, blessed Jesus Christ. We have come to the setting of the sun, and we look to the evening light. We sing to God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. You are worthy of being praised with pure voices forever. O Son of God, O Giver of life, the universe proclaims your glory. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who led your people Israel by a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Enlighten our darkness by the light of your Christ. May his word be a lamp to our feet and a light to our path. For you are merciful, and you love your whole creation. And we, your creatures, glorify you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Go ahead and be seated. Let my prayer rise before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Oh Lord, I call to you, come to me quickly. Hear my voice when I cry to you. Let my prayer rise before you as incense, the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. Set a watch before my mouth, O Lord, and guard the door of my lips. Let not my heart incline to any evil thing. Let me not be occupied in wickedness with evildoers. But my eyes are turned to you, O God. Let the incense of our repentant prayer ascend before you, O Lord, and let your loving kindness descend on us, that with purified minds we may sing your praises with the church on earth and the whole heavenly host, and may glorify you forever. Amen. In many and various ways God spoke to his people of old by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. All right. So last week we talked about God's original plan being fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth and subduing it, and how our rebellion turned and introduced death into this world, and how that dramatically changed not only the life of every individual human being, but life for the entire human race now becomes a struggle, and we end up on a treadmill. So we talked about how that transformation was shown in the genealogies and the flood and so on like that. So we're going to set that aside, and we're going to talk about something this week that is in some ways even more basic, that is something we don't ever think about. We think about death. We may not want to, but I mean, it's hard not to sometimes. But this thing that we're going to talk about now is something that we really don't think about. We assume it. We assume it, and then we're going to ask the question, why? Should we be assuming this? Okay. So, the brain, reason, truth, and TWTRA, the way things really are. Okay? That's what TWTRA, the way things really are. I got tired of saying that to myself, so I just put it. So we just kind of assume when we say truth, what do we mean by truth? Something is true. We mean it corresponds to the way things really are. That's what we mean by that, okay? But we're going to have to ask the question, do we have warrant for that? And then also, do we have warrant to believe that we have any right to say we understand the way things really are, okay? So let's suppose I have a conversation with an atheist right here in front of you all. And the atheist will look at me and they say, look around you. Can't you see? Can't you see there is no God? Look out there. This empty space, this galaxies, planets, and interstellar dust, that's what's out there. Look down here. Okay, everything happens by natural law. Can't you see that? That's what he's going to say. And I'm going to say, can't you see that life makes no sense whatsoever without God? Can't you see that? Now, the atheist is telling me the way things really are. The way things really are is there is no God. It's just blackness, and you're here for a little while, then you're gone. It's the way things really are. And I'm telling the atheist the way things really are. The way things really are is nothing makes sense if there's no God. Life doesn't make sense. Consciousness doesn't make sense. None of this makes any sense if there is no God. I'm also saying the way things really are. He's appealing to my senses and my brain. I'm appealing to his senses and his brain. And you know what we're both assuming? We're both assuming that our brains actually can detect the way things really are. We assume that. Don't even think about it. You just assume that, I mean, people may get it wrong. We recognize people get it wrong all the time. But we assume that the human brain is capable of sort of recognizing the way things really are. Some of us get it wrong, but the brain can do that. And the atheist thinks it can do that, and the Christian thinks that it can do that. And both of us think it can do that. We come to radically different conclusions. Okay, why do atheists think that their brain is capable of perceiving the way things really are? Why does the Christian think that they can perceive the way things really are? One of us is wrong. Which has the better claim? And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. Because it's just sort of built in. This is built in to Genesis 1 through 11. It's built into the entire Scripture. It's just assumed that your brain doesn't see things exactly the way things really are,
But it does assume that there is a strong correspondence between what your brain perceives, what reason understands, and something about the way things really are. Everywhere in Scripture, it assumes that. And the atheists assume that too. And we'll explore that question. You may never have explored this question. You may never have asked, how do I know that? But it's good. It's good that we should ask this, because what we're talking about when we talk about Genesis 1 through 11 is we are talking about the fundamental realities of this world and how different it is from those who reject it. Okay? It's profoundly different. And the atheist materialist sees the world in a very profoundly different way than we do. And one of those ways is what we think the relationship between our brain and the way things really are is. Okay? First off, a materialist is somebody who believes that everything is explainable just by material stuff, the matter and energy and the properties of things. There is a proper place for materialist thinking. And the prototype proper materialist thinker is the engineer. Okay? An engineer is a materialist. A materialist insofar as what the engineer is trying to do. The engineer wants to build a bridge. The engineer is not going to search the Scriptures for the heart of God on the issue of how to build a bridge. The issue, what the engineer is going to do is the engineer is going to ask, what materials do we need? How long is the span? What kind of materials and what kind of construction will span this river? And they're going to look to tables, and they're going to look to formulas, and they're going to look for what we know about the strength of different kinds of things, and they're going to determine how to build this bridge, or this television, or this automobile, or this mousetrap without any reference whatsoever to the supernatural or what God's thoughts about it might be. Now, that doesn't mean that the engineer doesn't care about God. It just means that what God thinks is not relevant to the subject of how to build a bridge. What's relevant there is how strong is this material, and how long is the span, and what do we know about building bridges, and what kind do we need to do this successfully. And he may be a deep and profound believer in God, but he recognizes that God doesn't have anything to say about this, but we have lots of knowledge about it. So an engineer is a materialist when they are doing their engineering. But I want you to note something about it. When the proper place to be a materialist, you're going to be an engineer, for example. It's not the only time you might want to be a materialist. I guess cooking you might want to be that way too. There are lots of other things where you're just not going to think about the supernatural. You're going to think about how to do this. But proper use of materialism is narrow and practical. Okay? It's narrow and practical. The engineer recognizes that there are a great many questions in life for which the engineering tables have nothing to say, like whether we should build a bridge. Okay, that's a different question. You get that from somewhere else. Somebody decides a bridge would be a good thing, but that's based upon something else. There's no table, there's no formula that tells you that. The engineer doesn't decide why we need a car, but other people, for other reasons, decide we need cars, we need roads, we need this, we need that. And these are good things, and these are bad things. And the engineer just says, well, if that's what you need, this is what we're going to do. And so a materialist is thinking very, very narrowly about what we're going to do with these physical things in the world, okay? And it's a very narrow purpose. And materialist doesn't go beyond that. Okay? You're a deep Christian, and you're going to pray when somebody's sick. You're not going to look at a table. Okay, so that's proper materialism. Improper materialism. Materialism run amok. Materialism completely overflowing its boundaries and going where materialism has no right to go. And that's where it tries to be an explanation for everything. Not just how to build a bridge or a toaster, but for everything. An atheist, technically an atheist is not necessarily a materialist. A materialist is necessarily an atheist, but we use the terms almost interchangeably, so I'm just atheist and materialist, I mean the same thing. I mean there's nothing out there but matter and energy. That's what I mean. There's no God, no supernatural, no angels out there, nothing like that. It's just infinite space and gas and all of that, and a Big Bang and so on. Materialism run amok attempts to explain Everything. They look at the world and they say, everything is here because that's the way material things are. This is what happens. When you have a big bang with this stuff in it, and it produces galaxies, and it produces stars, and it produces planets, and it produces oceans, and land, and plants, and people. It just does that, and it produces people who think. It just does that. That's the nature of things. Now, a materialist has no choice but to think that, because here we are, okay? Here we are, and we've already said there's nothing but matter and energy. So if there's nothing but matter and energy, and here we are, matter and energy must have just produced us, because that's the way matter and energy, that's what it does. It just, who would have thunk it if you didn't realize? But we now see, okay? A materialist explanation for the origin of species. This is what Darwin is famous for. Why are there so many different animals? And why do they look different ways? Where did they all come from? Now, Darwin gave a completely materialist explanation. This is the way things, matter and energy, work. And the way it works is we have this thing where the survival of the fittest, and there's stresses and strains. Life in this world, and creatures in this world have to adapt, and they adapt, and there's mutations and a struggle to survive, and some adaptations persist because they're helpful to a creature surviving, and others not so, and so they don't survive. And so you take the fact that there are occasional mutations in the genetic makeup of creatures, and you add constant day-by-day struggle to survive, and you recognize that those who can get ahead are more likely to reproduce, and you add millions and millions and millions of years, and what you're going to have is slow and steady changes and evolution to living things, and that's how it works. Some creatures adapted to live in the water, so they developed fins. Others adapted to survive by learning to fly, so they developed wings. Some learned to crawl under the ground, some to climb trees. Some learned to catch other creatures, and they developed fangs and claws, and others developed in order to digest berries. And everybody had to find their own niche, and it depends on where in the world they were and who can say, and this was millions of years ago, and some creatures developed funny things here and some funny things there. Some developed in a way that was well adapted to their environment, and then the environment changed, and so then they didn't survive, and they're all extinct. But it's just all automatic. It's just built into the way stuff is. Okay? This is called evolution, and it's based on this idea of adaptability, and occasional mutations, survival of the fittest, and millions of years, and that's just what happens. Okay, there's no God guiding any of this. There's no plan to it. Things aren't evolving toward anything. They're just going and going and going. And it just so happens that where we are right now just happens to be at this, it's a snapshot, and there happen to be people here. Nothing about the universe necessarily produced people. They didn't have to look like us. And another 10 million years, maybe we'll all be gone. There'll be something else. Maybe there'll be nothing like us at all. Who knows? But that's the origin of species. That's a materialist explanation. Now let me back up. That is not a materialist explanation. That is a materialist description. Okay? We don't have an explanation for how this happens. We have a description. We look at the fossil records and we say, this is what looks like happened. And then if there's no God, okay, then it had to happen some way. And when you look at the fossil record, you say, well, this is how it looked like it happened. It is a description, but not an explanation. If you ask, well, exactly how did that work? What adjustment do you make to genes to cause a fish to become an alligator? How does that work? And the answer is, we don't know. But it must have happened because, look. So there's a description, but not an explanation. It's a little bit like this. We have very precise formulas to describe the effect of gravity on two large bodies and how they attract one another. And we can calculate very, very accurately exactly what the gravitational pull will be at any point between these two planets, let's say, and their pull on one another. We don't have an explanation for what gravity is. There are various theories, but nobody knows. But we do know it's there. We measure it. Okay? So an explanation tells you why. A description just tells you what. Okay, so our description of how gravity works allows us to fly airplanes and calculate planetary motions and all kinds of things it allows us to do. It allows us very accurately to predict how much something will weigh at the top of Mount Everest and 300 miles above that and put things into orbit. It allows all of that without ever having a clue for what it really is. Why is it that a big thing attracts? We don't know. The materialist explanation, in quotes, for the origin of things is not an explanation. It is merely a description. We don't know how this would actually work. We've never seen it. We've never seen one species turn into another. We can't make that happen. And not only that, but when this theory was developed, the understanding of how complex living things were, they didn't have a clue. They did not have a clue what would be involved. They thought it was like this. You have a big phone. It's like a cell phone. You have a big phone. And then if you take pictures, year after year after year, starting in 1981, year after year, you see the phones get smaller and smaller and smaller. And you can say, well, you see there's this evolutionary force on phones, and it just kind of, small phones just happen to be more selected, and so they got smaller and smaller and smaller, and pretty soon as you're holding it in your hand. Okay, but what that pays no attention to is how complex a phone is. You can't just make it smaller. You can't just make it like this. Phones just get smart because people want them to be smart. A tremendous amount has to go into making this phone. And it did not happen just by the pressures from outside. Okay? Living things are like that. They're much more complicated than a cell phone. So how does this work? Well, we don't know. I'm going to give you an even bigger mystery. The materialist explanation, not for the origin of species, but for the origin of life itself. This is a different question. And people, they conflate these all the time. They will use evolution as an explanation for how life originally originated in the primordial oceans and then how it evolved into this present, huge panoply of living things, and you and I too. But evolution assumes living things. Living things competing. Living things adapting. Living things mutating. Living things reproducing. Okay? So evolution can't happen until you have a living thing. So how did you get the first living thing? Okay, that's not a question of evolution. Non-animate things can't, by evolution, produce a living thing. So the question is, well, how did that happen? Well, they used to have a theory. 80 years ago, the theory was that the primordial soup in the early Earth had lots of ammonia in it and other chemicals, and then there were lightning bursts because that's what it would have been like, and lightning strikes the water. And what happens is the electrical charges and the sloshing of the water and the temperatures and so forth like that, again, given millions and millions of years, eventually it produces a very, very simple life form. And then evolution is off and running, okay? That was what was thought 80 years ago or so. There was an experiment done 80 or 85 years ago that zapped what was thought to be the primordial soup, and then they measured and they found certain amino acids in there that are necessary for life. And so they thought, aha, we've hit upon it. By putting lightning in here, we have amino acids, and what that means is that must have been what happened. And you just, add millions of years, and voila, there you have it. Okay, well, even 80 years ago, they did not have a clue yet about how complicated even the simplest living thing is. In fact, they didn't have a clue how complicated the simplest part of the simplest living thing is. Just a very primitive bacterium and one small part of that single cell creature. We now realize how incredibly complicated that is, how finely tuned it is. Now, statisticians and probability theorists have gone to work on the question, could random sloshing of water and lightning bolts, or any combination of this or other things too, how long would it take for this to work? Okay? It's a little bit like imagining whether a hurricane could assemble a jumbo jet just by accident, just randomly things flying through the air, but they just all happen to come together just so, and there you have a jumbo jet. It's that kind of an equation. Well, in the last 85 years, it was assumed when this experiment was first done that we would just get better and better and better at showing how this works. There has been zero progress since then. An amino acid is not a living thing. It's not even close to a living thing. And the probability theorists and the statisticians are all pretty much in agreement that the chances of even the most primitive living thing happening by accident like that, just randomly, is so infinitesimally small that even in all the 15 billion years people think that the universe has been around, you're not even close to the amount of time you would need. What they will say is, it is so infinitesimally small that it is virtually zero. It can't happen. Why? It's just so complicated. And not only that, but it's not enough for you to put it together just once. You have to put together a whole series of systems, and they have to stay together. The range of things that would have to happen just by accident, statistically and from a probabilistic, but that's the theory. The theory is millions of years and lots of lightning bolts, sooner or later anything is going to happen. You've heard it, right? 5 monkeys sitting at typewriters given enough time will eventually produce all the works of Shakespeare. Have you heard that? It ain't true. It's not true. Probability is not going to do that. You won't say, no, eventually, every combination. There are so many combinations of words that you will spend virtually the rest of eternity and you're never going to come up with it. It won't happen. So that sounds like it will work, but it doesn't. Okay, so this is an aside. There's no extra charge for that. I am merely pointing out that the materialist explanation for where life came from is zero. We know any responsible, honest scientist of any sort that knows anything about this will tell you we don't have a clue where life started. Now, we have lots of reasons to believe that it developed this way, and then they're interpreting the fossil record and all of that. They're still not explaining how that happened. But as for the origin, zero. And remember also, even as for the evolution, we still have a description, not an explanation. Okay. Now we're going to get closer to what we really are here to talk about. What about the origin of the human brain? Where did that come from? Well, it's just like everything else. Some creatures developed claws so that they could catch their prey, teeth so they could eat it. Some developed different kinds of claws so that they dig and burrow into the ground. Some of them learned to fly, some of them climbed trees, all the rest. And they developed different organs and appendages that helped them to do that, because if you developed an organ that didn't help you to do anything, then it's not going to help you reproduce. And if you developed an organ that kills you instantly, you're never going to reproduce. But if you develop an organ or some feature, some attribute of your body that helps you get by in life, well, that will. This is the theory. And so you can think of the brain, from a materialist point of view, the brain is like your hands or your feet. It's just a physical thing that helps these creatures that have these brains to develop. And some brains did better than others. And if a brain does well, it helps the species survive. So over time, we get smarter and smarter. Because it turns out that a brain that can identify more accurately danger is more likely to keep a creature alive than a brain that's too stupid to know that a bear eats people. Okay? A brain that recognizes patterns, a brain that can think and imagine how we get across here, or how that's the best way to protect ourselves from a bear, or all that kind of stuff. Brains that are really good at recognizing things, spotting things, learning to communicate with other creatures and so on like that, learning to talk with other people, all these sorts of things. These brains are much more useful. And they will enable, chimpanzees or apes or whatever it is that you might say they are, these are more likely to and it turns out that the smarter the brain gets, by golly, the more we reproduce and the more successful we are. And so over millions of years or hundreds of thousands, we just get smarter and smarter and smarter until today, look what we can do. Okay? But our brain is just basically, it's like we learned to walk on 2 feet rather than crawl because it gave us certain advantages. And our brains got smarter, and that gave us certain advantages. So our brain is like every other thing. It helps us to adapt to the world in which we live and survive. And brains that didn't do that don't get passed on. And brains that do, you've heard of the Darwin Awards, haven't you? Oh, this is a morbid, but it's funny. It's morbid. The Darwin Awards are awarded to those people that are so stupid they should not be able to pass on their genes. And basically the Darwin Awards are handing out an imaginary award to somebody who dies in a spectacularly stupid way. Okay? So you can imagine that some people die in very embarrassing and very stupid ways. And so sometimes you'll see that they got the Darwin Award because their brain was not fit for passing on. Okay? But they hit upon something important there. A brain that's too stupid to pass on won't pass on. And the brain, the materialist understanding of the human brain, is like that. It helps us to survive. That's what it does. And it does that by adapting to the environment, competing with other creatures and with other people, competing with the weather, and learning to survive. Okay? That's what it does. In that regard, it's no different than developing a second stomach for digesting certain things that other animals can't digest, or developing a long neck to reach things that other animals can't reach, or learning to fly so that you can get away, or learning to have, or developing very good eyesight and stereo eyesight so that you can see things even when they're not moving. And you can see in color. All of these are adaptations, and our brain is an adaptation too, to help us to survive, to adapt to the world. Okay? There is a problem here for the materialist. If you believe this, and if you're a materialist, you got to. Where else did life come from? You can't say, well, I'm a materialist, but I think God made people. Then you're not a materialist, okay? If you think God made people, then you're not a materialist. The problem for the materialist, they're assuming things. They are assuming, for example, that the material brain is like a calculator. It's like a computer and is good at sort of solving puzzles. And they're right. It is. And so they see the brain is well adapted to do that, to spot patterns, to solve problems, to see relationships. Okay? The brain is the seat. It's the organ that does that for us. The eyes see, the ears hear, the brain calculates and figures. And it does that by means of what we call reason. Okay? Reason is its ability to sort of calculate and massage situations and imagine what could be and so on like that. That human beings do so well because our brains are just much, much better than other animals' brains at solving puzzles and imagining what could be. And we assume that reason is able to happen upon truth. And by truth, we mean the way things really are. Now, there's an interesting thing there. The way things really are. That is an esoteric sort of idea. The way things really are. When I say esoteric, I mean you're never going to see it. It's a construct of the mind. There is this thing out there that's the way it really is. Have you ever seen it? People will tell you that this is mostly empty space. Hardly any denser than the air compared to, say, a black hole, or for that matter, empty space. But you say, it doesn't feel very empty to me. Well, no, it doesn't, because these are very tiny things in there, and they're held together with electricity. Can you imagine that? Well, then why can't I just peel it all apart? Well, that's it. But you see, the thing is, the way things really are, we are told, that's the way things really are, but that's not the way it looks. In fact, if you do a little study at all about how perception looks, I'm looking at the clock. Am I seeing the clock? Somebody could say, you're not seeing the clock. There are photons bouncing off that clock. Photons, little packets of light. And they strike my retina. I'm not seeing the clock. I'm receiving photons that are bounced off that clock. Well, then your eyes are seeing the photons then. No, No, the back of my eye, the retina, is reacting to the photons. It doesn't see anything. What it does is the retina produces electrical signals based upon the photons. Well, that's how you see. No, that's not how you see either. The electrical signals on your retina at the back of your eye get sent to the back of your brain. Or your brain. Well, your brain's not even attached to your eye. It's not like there's a little tube and your brain is looking through the little eye, the lens. No, it's not. It's calculating. Your brain is calculating. It is calculating and turning electrical signals received from your retina and producing in your head the idea of what you're looking at. You're not looking at the clock. My brain is calculating electrical signals received from photons bouncing off the clock. That's a lot of difference there. Have I ever thought to myself, those photons are tickling my brain in a very interesting way? No, I'm looking at the clock. Okay? How is it really? What does God see when he looks at us? If we want to talk about God. If we're a materialist, what is it really like? What's really going on? We assume that our brain happens upon truth, and we assume that truth has some relationship to the way things really are. Why should we assume that? The brain is a product of our world. The brain was not designed by anybody. If you're a materialist, it's not designed by anybody. It's the product. What's it a product of? Well, the physical environment, and it evolved like everything else. What did it evolve to do? To survive. To identify patterns and so forth in order to survive. Can you tell me what that has to do with the way things really are? Do I need to know about photons in order? Does that give me an advantage in reading the time? It's a completely esoteric thought, the way things really are. Here's not an esoteric thought. Learning the difference between the big hand and the small hand. That's important. That will help me understand what a clock is for and what it matters, what the photons are saying. I don't have to ever know about a photon. In fact, somebody who knows all about photons and does not know how to read time is in a much worse place, even though you might say, actually, they're seeing things more the way they really are. No, they're not. The brain is optimized to see something. Why should we think it's the truth? Why shouldn't we just rather say the brain is optimized to see things that will help us to survive? And it's not even optimized to do that. It's just optimized in a way that works. When I was in college, I was taking an introductory science class, and the professor asked the classroom this question. He says, why do we do science? And he got all kinds of very highfalutin answers, about all the wonderful things that science does and the truth and so on. And he listened to one after the next. And finally, he just walks up at the board and he writes on the board, it works. That's it. That's why we do science. It works. If it didn't work, we wouldn't do it. That is not a very, esoteric or inspiring message, is it? But he's right. It works. Why do our brains think the way they do? Because that's what worked. That's what worked. Not that's what the way things really are. Okay, let me back up. The materialist says the way things really are is there's nothing out there. There's no God. The materialist says you are just a complicated machine. The materialist says even your sense of self-awareness and a soul is just an illusion. The materialist says there's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad, there's no transcendent anything, and sooner or later you're going to return to the dust, and that's that. And there's no meaning, there's nothing like that, okay? And the materialist doesn't believe that. They say that, but they don't believe that. Do you know why they don't believe that? Well, precisely, because human beings can't live like that. You won't get up and go to work if you think nothing matters. You won't have a family. You won't work. You won't cut your lawn. You won't shave. You won't do anything. If you think nothing matters, you are not going to be motivated to do anything at all. Human beings are a wretched mess. Nihilism destroys the people who adopt it. Okay? Nihilism doesn't work. Our brains are not nihilistic. Even though the materialist says, well, they ought to be. On the other hand, it turns out that people believing in God or gods, people believing in karma, people believing in anything that makes life somehow make sense, the materialist says, that's all nonsense. Why does everybody believe it then? Why does everybody believe that their children are important? That their mothers are not just fancy computers that will one day disintegrate into dust, and who cares? Why does everybody believe that things matter? Why? Because that works. Okay? That works. Our brains are products of this world. The reason why they think the way they do, if you're a materialist, the reason why they think the way they do is because that's the way the world is. The world produced your brain to think this way. Why? Because this worked. At least it worked when your brain evolved. At least it worked to help you survive in the environment in which human beings grew up in. There doesn't have to be anything about the truth. The way things really are is irrelevant to the question. That clock only needs me to know how to read it. Now, to give you another proof, of all the creatures in the world, let's set human beings aside, of all the creatures in the world, is there any other creature that has any concept of the way things really are? And yet our world is filled with creatures who are successfully passing on their genes. Apparently, seeing things the way they really are is not all that important for survival. That flies do quite nicely, and they never pondered the question, gee, I only live 2 weeks? That's unfair. I wonder what happens when I die. Okay, they don't worry about it. They don't think about anything. They just do what flies do. Okay, only humans are plagued with this idea. Let's even think about that. Is it an evolutionary advantage to be plagued by your own mortality? Wouldn't it be better if we were just like the squirrels that just have a good old time and they eat and they do what squirrels do and then they die and they never worry about it? Wouldn't life be better? But we are plagued with worry. Okay, so understand that the human brain, according to a materialist idea, okay, is the product of the world. It doesn't think the way it does because the truth is out there, and our brain is designed to see it. Our brain is designed to help us to survive, and it does what works. That's it. And what works in one environment may not work in another. Let's face it. The things that work in the Arctic don't work at the equator. Things that work on mountains may not work in valleys. Different places and different times, different things work, and the brain is a reaction to all of that, and it develops ways of working to help us survive on the Serengeti or wherever it is. Okay. By the way, this isn't what I think. But this is what a materialist has to think. Our brain is the product of this world. It is an adaptive organ like every other organ that you have. It is not a planned instrument. So the basic problem for the materialist is this. Given the brain's origin, why should it think it would recognize the truth? I mean, the way things really are. Why should it think so? The truth for a human being is what works. I mean, from just a purely materialist point of view, the only truth I care about is what works. If it helps me read the time, it helps me get to work on time, it helps me make a paycheck, that's all I care about. I don't care what really time is. All I care about is that clock helps me get to work, and that's it. And there's a lot of knowledge like this. I don't need to care about F equals ma. All I need to know is that's the gas pedal, that's the brake, that's a stop sign. Those are the things I need to know in order to survive and get by. I don't need to know any of the rest. I will be perfectly happy with never knowing anything about the way things really are. In fact, if you tell me I have never known anything the way it really is, okay? All I know is what works. I'm rich and you're not. Okay, I might say that, okay? This is not a problem for a Christian. Christians have an explanation for the brain too, an understanding of the brain also. So it's not like we just say, well, that doesn't matter. I mean, we don't know. We do know. We have, a very reasonable explanation for why my brain might actually perceive something about the way things really are. Ponder a playground. We have a nice playground out here. Deposit little children in it. Little children who've never seen that playground before. Put them in it. What will happen? Immediately they will begin playing. We will be able to predict how they're going to play. We can see all the gravel and we're going to say, they're going to dig in the gravel, they're going to get dirty, they're going to throw the gravel, they're going to do that. They're going to find out about the stairs and they're going to find out the slide. You watch and they're going to like that and they're going to find the monkey bars and they're going to climb on that. And we can imagine all the different things that all those children are going to do, and we're going to know that that's good. And every child will do it. Because every child will instinctively know what to do with a place like this. Why? It's a very simple explanation. Because the person who built the playground was once a child. I know what children want. I know what I used to do. I'm going to build something that I used to like. And since the children are like me, they're going to like it too. Okay? So the situation of the human brain and the world in which we live is like that. And Christianity is explicit about this. Not implicit, it's explicit. God created the universe in a certain way. God has a mind. And that mind is a mind that creates the universe according to order. It's a very orderly mind. And the Scripture teaches how God created the world, and if there's one thing you're going to get out of this is God has a very orderly and methodical way of creating the universe, and it is a very regular thing. And God also created you and your mind, and He created your mind to fit with this world. And He said, you are in my image. You are like me in certain regards. You have a mind. I have a mind. I've built a playground for you. I happen to know what you're going to like. Not that I was once a little child. It's just that God creates our mind to fit in the same world that He created. Both have the same origin. The child and the playground had a similar origin. The dad and our universe and us have the same origin, our brain. So from a Christian point of view, actually, it would be rather surprising if our brains did not perceive something about the way things really are. That would be very surprising. If God created us, all this for us, and put us in it, and then we can't understand it and we can't fathom it, that would be very unusual. But actually, it makes perfect sense from this point of view. The rationalist has a problem because they assume that reason and their brain can find the truth. But they never prove that. They just assume it. But a materialist understanding of things is all your brain learns to do is what works. And if what works has nothing whatsoever to do with the way things really are, you're better off than the person who sees things the way they really are, but their brain doesn't work in the real world. Okay? It's like the the idiot savant. Okay, they're brilliant. They're brilliant, and they can't function. They see things that the rest of us don't see, but they can't read time. So if you give me a brain that can see things the way they really are, or a brain that works, well, but from a Christian point of view, you see, so from a materialist point of view, it's the brain that works. Truth is what works. Truth is not what corresponds with what really is. Truth is what works. That's why your brain survived. For the Christian, we can say, well, yeah, truth is what works. And what works is what corresponds to reality. And why do we make that step? Because God, who made your brain, also made the playground in which we live. He intended for us to fill the earth and subdue it. It makes sense. And a Christian doesn't have to argue, well, how do we know that reason actually sees things in any sense the way they are? And the reason is, well, because my mind is not the product of the world. Random, reaction, to forces and pressures and adaptation. My mind is the product of intelligent design. An intelligent God made my mind to do this. That makes sense. If you believe in a God that created the world and created people, it follows naturally that our minds would work this way. If you're a materialist, there is no reason on earth you should think that your mind would be able to recognize truth if it saw it. All it knows is this is how we are evolved to survive. If we grew up on a different planet, we would have a different reality. You see this? Think about it. Because it is a profound problem that those who study science and whatnot like that recognize that we take it for granted. The atheist takes it for granted that my reason is actually operating on the way things really are. And sometimes they're very surprised when it seems to work out that way. Okay, Christian explanation, the playground. Christianity and reason. All right, well, I just told you. We believe that reason is also a creation of God. It's just God programming our minds to fit with the world He put us in. So that's what we understand. So do we believe that reason works? The answer is yes. Yeah, subject to God's purpose, the purpose for which He made it. Okay? We don't make reason king. Reason is the answer to all our problems. Reason knows everything. Reason helps us to understand the world in which we live. That's what it's for. That's what we use it for. Okay? If we make reason God, that's not what it's used for. And so if you try to make reason God, it may lead you places where it's not designed to do. Actually, what this does is this puts reason in exactly the same position which engineers use when they're materialists. We use reason to learn to build a bridge, and we understand that that works because that is a very narrow and very practical. This is what works. This is over the years. This is what we found works. You build it that way, it falls down. You build it this way, it works. So this is what you're going to do. Okay? For the Christian, it's built in. We understand. That's how reason is supposed to work. Same idea with Christianity and science, but let me point this out. Although it is popular to talk about the antipathy between Christianity and science, the reality is they are very closely aligned. The truth of the matter is, science grew up and was very comfortable in the Christian West. And there's a reason for that. Because the Christian mind understands that God created all things and created us. He put us in the playground and He allowed us to go and explore. So it made sense to those who believed in an omniscient God who created all of us. It made sense that the universe ought to make sense too. So it made sense to us that mathematical principles would map against the world and make sense. These things develop comfortably in Christianity because Christianity has a very comfortable understanding of the relationship between reason and reality. It's not at odds at all. The only time science gets at odds is when you determine that reason is your God. And when reason is your God, well, then it comes unglued from its source, and now we have a problem. We have exactly the same problem that the materialist has. What makes you think your reason works without God? Christians and the brain. We certainly understand that the brain is a physical organ. But Christians mostly are dualists. So we sort of draw a distinction between the brain and the mind. What that distinction is, there's lots of theories about that. Nobody really knows for sure. But this much is for sure. There is an immaterial part of a human being. We call it the soul. The mind is an immaterial aspect. It is not just an emanation from the physical workings of the brain. It is something else. But it is closely attached to the brain. But let's think about this. The brain is like an organ of perception. Your eyes, right, collect light. It helps us to perceive visually. Our ears help us to perceive audibly, and so on. And the brain helps us to perceive too. To perceive order, to perceive meaning, purpose, transcendency. It allows us to take an image and see something in it. It allows us to perceive greater truths. The eyes can't see that by itself. It's the brain that recognizes there's something very beautiful in this painting, something very brilliant in this. It's the brain that recognizes. Our brain recognizes that there's a purpose to life and rebels against the idea that nothing matters. Our senses just collect what's out there. They're optimized to do that. God creates our senses to collect the data that's out there, and He gives us our brain to sort through all of that and to find what's good and what's right and what is true and what makes sense, and to calculate, and yes, to survive, and to know how to get away from the bear, but also to ponder great thoughts and to talk, not just to get our next meal, but to tell stories, to find joy, to perceive victory and defeat, to live the fullest of life. God gives us brains to do all of those sorts of things. And it's an organ that does that. Physically, it helps us to perceive. Somehow or another, my soul or my mind is also seeing, but it's seeing through my eyes. And I'm also perceiving and calculating and all that, and it's calculating through my brain. But the ultimate sort of repository for what I am is not just the gray matter. It's this immaterial soul or mind, whatever it is, and whatever its relationship. So yeah, you bang somebody on the head, and their brain doesn't work so well anymore. You poke them in the eye, and their eye doesn't work so well anymore either. And that's going to affect them. So there is a close connection between our physical bodies and our physical members that sense and collect data. And there is a tight connection between those things, the human body and the human soul. They are not like just my soul is just sort of floating around and my body is doing its own thing. They are tightly intertwined. What hurts my body hurts my soul. And when my soul is aching, my body does too. They are very tight. We are both physical and transcendent creatures. A human being is physical and immaterial. The human brain has a physical dimension and an immaterial dimension. It's really quite wonderful if you think about it, that human beings are built to experience the physical world and also to be able to experience the spiritual world. Animals only experience the physical world. Presumably, although I don't have enough data on this, it may very well be that angels don't experience the physical world. But we've got a foot in both. Because that's how we're designed. So, knowledge for the Christian is a matter of perception and reason, which we do believe leads to things that correspond more or less, or in some important way, to the way things really are. But reason can only take us so far, and there are things that reason alone cannot find, cannot get to, cannot understand. And because there are things that we cannot know and we cannot understand, but that are important for us to know, in order for a human being to be fully human, it is necessary that some of our knowledge be gained from other than the operations of the brain, experience, and reason, and that's where revelation comes in. God tells us things we would never know otherwise. And He tells us things we need to know. And if you want to see the problem with reason, all you really have to do is look at those who do not rely on revelation at all and see what their worldview looks like. Our materialist friend, our atheist friend that we began this tonight, have a nice conversation. He may be a very friendly guy. I might like him. But here's the truth. He doesn't know where he came from. He doesn't know why he's here. He doesn't know what it means. He doesn't know where it's going. That's a heck of a thing for a human being to be endowed with this superabundance of self-awareness, and all they get from it is confusion and doubt. But that's the situation. Without revelation, there's only you can learn to read a clock and you can learn to survive in this world, but you cannot learn why. And that's what you're left with without revelation. God gives us His Word so that we are not left alone with reason. We were never intended to do that. Reason was always supposed to work in tandem with revelation so that we would have a full appreciation for the way things really are, so that we may have life and have it in abundance. You chop off the revelation because you chopped off God. You rely entirely on reason, and it turns out that reason will undermine itself. By the same token, Christians are not anti-intellectual. It's not as though we think everything is revelation. Our minds can't tell us anything. Well, our minds do tell us all kinds of things. And Christians are great fans of science and logic and reason and intelligent behavior and thinking things through, and we're all about that. Now, all of this that I'm saying, the only part of Scripture that I've quoted is just the part where it says, let us make man in our image. In the image of God He made him. Male and female He made them. Okay, that's it. That, and I guess the part where it says, in the beginning God created. I'll quote that too. The same God created you and me and our minds as created everything else. And He created it for the purpose that we should live here with Him. So, given that understanding, the way our brains and minds work and the way reason works to apprehend the way things really are makes perfect sense. But for the materialist, they just assume that somehow or another an unthinking world that has no idea why anything is, but just reacts to things, like water flowing downhill, it bubbles over rocks because that's a rock and that's what it has to do. It doesn't think about it. That the universe just produced a mind that for some reason or another perceives the way things really are, and there is no reason to think that. None whatsoever. If there's no God, there's no reason to believe that our mind do that or that they would need to do that. None of the other creatures do that, and they all do just fine. There's no explanation for this unless they just say, well, I think we do perceive things the way they really are. Well, they have to say that. Do you know why? As soon as the materialist says, my mind does not perceive anything accurately, I can't trust anything, then you close up shop and go to church. That's what you're going to do then. Okay? So if you're a committed materialist, you have to assume that your mind is seeing truly things. When you're pointing up to the sky and say, can't you see there's no God? And you assume that that means something. You have to assume that your brain is seeing and recognizing something that's true. You have to assume that. Or you will just be quiet and you'll never say anything. Well, we can say that. We have reason to say that. Okay. I'm 1 minute ahead of schedule. All right, remain seated, and let's all together speak the magnificent arm. He has scattered the proud in the imagination of their hearts. He has cast down the mighty from their thrones and has exalted the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things, and the rich He has sent empty away. He has helped His servant Israel in remembrance of His mercy, as He spoke to our fathers, to Abraham, and to his seed forever.